a statistic we say a lot is 68% of the times the opening bidder buys the property.
If someone's bidding very quickly, very aggressively, and if they're going immediately after someone else, it can throw others off their game.
What you're forcing yourself to do is you're forcing yourself to make a life-changing decision inside 25 seconds.
Walk right up to the cliff as quickly as you can and without hesitation, and you'll either get it or you won't, but you won't die wondering.
It's been a lot of fun, and the best is yet to come, I think.
All right, so today we've got Justin Nickerson here. Justin's been involved with us at Kollosche now for probably 3.5 years and calls the majority of our auctions. So extremely experienced, has won numerous accolades, has a team of auctioneers and professionals underneath him who also do some work with our company, and has provided a lot of support and training to our team. Justin, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I think over the course of your tenure or your company's tenure with us, we were calculating, done somewhere between 700 and 800 auctions, and overall, without getting into the clearance stats, it's been an overwhelming success.
It has been, yeah. I think it's been a big change to the business. I think from when we first started working with the business, it was predominantly a lot of EOI. That high-end property in particular was predominantly transacting around EOI, but I think the business at large has very much pivoted towards auction. And not only just when the market was going strongly, but even as the market has probably hesitated, a lot of the competitors have run away from auction, where you guys have really sort of doubled down and embraced it, and the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, and off the back of that, collectively, we've achieved some outstanding results, some extremely high prices at auction. A lot of that sort of 7, 10, 15, and even more recently the $24 million one. There was always a bit of a feeling that there wasn't enough depth in the market to auction properties at that level, but the results appear to be speaking for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that rings true. I think there was that fear, and also the fear that the high-end property needs to transact in secret, away from prying eyes. But I think the way that, particularly that the Kollosche team have adopted their auctions, have allowed people, even if they want their privacy maintained, they can do it through, phone bidding mechanisms and the like. And I know even the one recently that sold at 24 million, both of the premium buyers were on the phone, away from the kind of furnace of the auction, having their privacy maintained, but still embracing that face-to-face transparency of at least being able to see or hear your competition rather than it going effectively into a Dutch auction situation, which quite commonly is EOI. So it's been a lot of fun, and the best is yet to come, I think.
Yep. And so with the auction process in Queensland, what do you think it is that differentiates the successful auctions and those that are probably not as successful? Because we obviously come across a lot of clients that have had bad experiences elsewhere, and they think it's just a byproduct of luck, or that, yeah, like how important is the execution piece, the process? Do you want to talk through some of that with us?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I think we always say that it's like driving a car, that the auction is the vehicle and the agent is the driver. If the car crashes into a pole, it's very rarely the car that's the problem, it's the person who's operating it. And we see that firsthand. One of the beauties about being an independent business is we work with a whole scope of different agencies. We work with some of the very best, we work with some of the very worst, we work with a lot in between. And I think generally it comes down to a couple of things specifically. One is handling the price question. So obviously here in Queensland, we're bound by not revealing price. That is a bit of a minefield that a lot of agents have got to navigate. Do I avoid price? What can I say? How do I say it? How do I not disengage someone? So the really good agents we work with have confidence around that. They know that the question's coming, they're confident in answering it, and they've got the right answer to engage people. The second one is an ability to get their sellers, I guess, understanding the market quicker. So getting the right information out of the market, providing it through to their sellers. So the sellers aren't blindsided on the day of what's going to happen. They've got a pretty good flight plan as to what occurs. The last one, and probably the most important one, I think, is the very best agents we work with have a good relationship with their buyers. When we turn up to auctions with inexperienced agents, it's a bit of anything can happen. I've got no idea where my buyers are, how many I have, where they're at, what levels they're at, what budgets they have, how they feel about the property. the best agents we work with, we turn up and they know who their best buyers are, what level they're likely to get to, and they've got a bit of a flight plan as to how things occur. So I think those three things are really the keys for agents that adopt auctions and do them well consistently, as opposed to those that might be doing it just every now and then. But if a seller ever has a bad experience, it's generally tied back to the person, not the method.
So what we typically find now is dealing with people from interstate, there is a lot of resistance from them around our legislation, our laws, and they find it a little bit backwards, and they don't understand how you can't give a guide or why you can't give a guide. And I guess what has become really evident over the course of the last probably 4 years is we've seen so many properties that have sold for considerably more than the seller's expectations. And it just makes you wonder that if you had pigeonholed that with a specific guide, that you might have actually cut a lot of competition out of that, and that may have impacted on the result. I can think of one where they interviewed 10 agents. They had indications on price through the appraisal between 2.5 and 4 million from the 10 agents. They had varying fees, varying budgets, some budgets from $3,000 to $5,000, and ours sitting at about 45,000 with a national marketing campaign, because we really wanted to make sure that we captured every single buyer in the market. On the day, the reserve was 3.5. They had a refer to of 3.2. We had 179 inquiries, 123 inspections. We had offers through that process from 800,000 to 3 million. And then on the day, we had 25 registered bidders, and bidding opened at $1 million. And after 52 bids and 30 something minutes, we sold it for 5,375,000. Now, I recall dealing with buyers that came through that property, one in particular who made us an offer at 1.8 million, said they'd get to 2, but didn't want to waste their time turning up on a Sunday if that was not going to be in the range. And then they were still bidding at 4.4. And the buyers that gave us the offer at 3 million prior to auction, who ended up being the highest bidder, engaged a buyer's agent who they'd given instructions to only get to 3.5. And then in the heat of the moment paid 5,375,000. So obviously these buyers had capacity to get to that level, and there was plenty that dropped off. But it just astounds me that I look at the system in New South Wales and Victoria where they actually do provide guides, and I wonder how much does that actually impact on their ability to get the ultimate price. Whereas from our perspective, we do a detailed CMA. We put all of the recent sales, as much information around them as possible to support the value, but you never know what an emotional buyer is going to pay in competition with other emotional buyers.
And that's exactly right. And I think the hard part about price guides is it doesn't equate for the two ingredients, which is exactly what you said, which is that how much is the buyer emotionally engaged on a property and what's the level of competition. Those things will be more meaningful than any price guide will. You know, it's funny, now that I'm a big time speaker and trainer, I get around the country to do a bit of training, and that's obviously tongue in cheek, but we go to Sydney and we do training in Sydney, and they say, oh, I wish we were in Queensland and didn't have the price guides and we could just go no price. Everyone always kind of wants what they don't have in their local territory. I actually think it's simpler without a price guide, you know, because there's so much legislation around price guides, what you can do, what you can't do, how you got to adjust it. You know, it becomes quite difficult to do that. And you're exactly right. Who sets the price guide? Is it set by the seller who may want too much, set by the agent who can't accurately predict the price? Like you run into these problems.
Or an opportunistic buyer that comes in with really low offers, and then you're supposed to set your price guide based off that.
Yeah, and fundamentally we talk about auction. One of the beauties about auction is it's no price marketing.
Yep.
Why would we put a price on it, which is a price guide? So I actually think our legislation here is actually the best that you can find. It makes it quite easy. Now, I know there's agents that circumnavigate that and give price guides. Whether they choose to do that or not is completely their business to do it. And that sometimes can create an expectation with buyers that they want one from you because, oh, we called the agent down the road and they gave us one, therefore you have to give us one. But I actually think it's simpler to leave the price away from it.
Yeah, we get that a lot. So
yeah, let them engage where they like and then see where it shapes out.
Yeah, no, it's something that I see happen quite regularly. They'll come to us and say that one of the agents from a competitive business has blatantly given them a price guide or told them what will stop the auction, and And in doing that, they have expectations that we'll do the same, and then get a little bit frustrated when we won't. But we put a real focus on obviously giving them all of the supporting data, and then putting them in a position to.
I thought you were going to mention a company name. Then I thought we were going to have to bleep it out in the middle of the podcast. But names are changed to protect identities. But yeah, and I think the hard part is that for a long period of time, that's what got taught, or got taught the find their budget, agree with them, get them along, like that sort of dialogue. And it becomes very hard if you've learned a certain way to untangle that and go in a different way. But if we come back to it fundamentally, we don't know the price. Our job is just to collect people, put them in an environment where it's going to sort itself out. And that should be our focus, I think.
But what I'm finding, I'm seeing a lot of properties in this changing market over the last 6 months that are going to auction with other agencies. And then they're not actually getting any bidders, or they might have one bidder turn up. And so then the vendors are saying, well, the auction failed, the process didn't work. And we're having to explain that the reason you've only had one person or no bidders is typically because someone has telegraphed your expectations, which are significantly above a logical figure where a buyer sees value, and therefore most of them don't turn up. And so then to encourage them to go back through a similar process is a lot harder the second time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you have that conversation with, I know, owners that whatever your expectations are, you should be the only person that knows that, because as soon as that seeps out to the market, that influences people's behaviour.
Yep.
And with respect, if we advertise what our sellers wanted from day ones of campaigns on every auction, we would struggle to sell anything, because that's quite often a very different figure to what eventually transacts. Because at that point, they don't have a knowledge of the market. They only have their own hope and dream and circumstances. They don't know where the market situates. And that's part of the skill of a good agent, is delivering that information so they can either align their expectations or recalibrate it. Or sometimes, like you said, it's actually going up. They think it's here and it actually sells here above that. But yeah, we always say the joke is that the seller's always above the market, the buyers are always below it, and auctions are about trying to get a perfect match and a perfect date at the same point at the same time.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You look, we just did a recent one at the Kollosche, which your company called, and the property sold under the hammer with 10 registered bidders for 24 million. It had been on the market for some time previously with offers over 25. We got no engagement. No one wanted to participate. We'd had a pre-sale valuation done from a local valuer. They'd put a range of between 17 and 20 on it. Before we started the process, the owner disregarded that and said offers over 25. We then changed strategy and the narrative to the marketplace when the owner decided, look, I just want to divest the asset. He hadn't been back in there since pre-COVID. It's a large house. It needed to be activated, and whilst it sat there, it was just deteriorating. So the ultimate buyers bought it and planning on spending 5 to 7 million on a refurb. But on during that process, we had the highest offer we received was 20 million prior to auction. That buyer turned up and he told me that his intention was to pay 21. He wasn't going a cent higher than that. And the ultimate buyer was on the phone to me, and he'd told me prior to that, with a number of inspections, that he saw value between 15 and 20. He just wasn't sure where it sat, and ultimately he was going to spend at least 5 million on it for a refurb, and he said, but I might be needing to spend 6 or 7, and might be a little bit naive thinking that I'll get away with 5. So he was on the phone. He had a number written down in front of him at 18.8 million on a piece of paper, he said. We got through the auction. He crossed that out and wrote 20. Then it got to 20.1 with the bidder that had made the offer previously at 20. And over a period of negotiations, that got lifted to 21. He came back in at 21.35, went on the market at 21.5. And they battled it out to 24. So you look at those circumstances, and he actually rang me afterwards after all the dust had settled and said, oh, I've only organised $2 million deposit because I was never planning on going above that. So that shows when you get those right circumstances, and it brought all these people to the table and helped transact, and that the market felt that was a very strong price and obviously a fantastic result. But it wasn't until we created that level of urgency and competition that it brought all these people to the table that were otherwise sitting on their hands. So
would have loved to see his piece of paper in the end, all the crosses out where it eventually got to. I think the word you use there is so important in the narrative. the great thing about auctions is the narrative is the seller's going to sell it.
Yep.
You know, that's the inbuilt advantage it has, other than the seller setting the terms of every other method of sale. Quite often, if it's priced by negotiation or it's for sale or even EOI, it just lacks that punch. It looks like sellers are going out there testing the market. They're going to see where it sits in the market, and if they're not really that happy with it, they won't sell it. Auction infers that the sellers are willing to accept market conditions, and that narrative is so important because no buyer in this market wants to transact with a seller who wants too much. They want to transact with sellers who want to sell it.
And so what do you say to buyers that turn up to auctions and decide they don't want to bid until it's on the market? Because obviously we see a lot of that where people try and outsmart themselves and think, well, I'm not going to bid because it'll push the price up, rather than actually turning up, participating, and putting the seller in a position to make a decision.
If I had $1 for every time someone had asked me if it's on the market, or they'd said, I'm not going to bid until it's on the market, I'd be almost as rich as you are. So I think it's just a flawed strategy, and it comes from pushing decision-making back to right to the end of the auction. What they're trying to do is to ease their way in, kind of have a warm-up auction, and then start going when the whips are cracking. The problem with doing that is, A, you allow someone else to start to control proceedings. So the other people who are there have got confident, they've got comfortable with bidding, they're engaged, they feel good because they've been a part of it. You've allowed those people to actually get higher on the property than they're going to be otherwise. And the worst thing that can happen as a buyer is the buyer who walks in with a budget of 2 million extends to 2.5, the buyer with a 2.5 budget extends to 3, and all of a sudden everyone starts to outkick their coverage. And you, as the buyer who's waiting for the perfect time, have let these buyers get really comfortable and warmed up. It's like, they're doing a running race and you've allowed them to warm up and you've got to run cold, because that's effectively what you're doing. The biggest problem with it though is that it forces you to make really quick decisions. And as a buyer, that's the worst thing you want to be doing. So the person who's under the least amount of stress during an auction is the highest bidder, because they're in front. So someone has to take those rights away from them. If you're waiting till the very end, what you're forcing yourself to do is you're forcing yourself to make a life-changing decision inside 25 seconds. Because that's how long you have traditionally from when we say it's on the market to when it sells, is 25 seconds. So if you're going to wait, you're going to push all that decision making to that very short time frame of 25 seconds. And in that 25 seconds, you have to evaluate the price, your feeling around the price, and whether you're going to buy the home or not. And again, this decision that you're about to make has consequences for the rest of your life. Like, whether you buy it or don't buy it is going to have consequences on the rest of your life. And you're going to try and make that decision inside 25 seconds. Also, the while everyone's looking at you, some lunatics up the front yelling first, second, third time in your face. So that you got that pressure on you as well. And all of a sudden what happens is our human instinct starts to take over. So we go from making clear, rational decisions to then fight, flight, freeze, which is our human instinct. Most people are going to revert to freeze. They're going to hesitate and go, it's more than we thought. No. And then it sells to someone else, and they're driving home and they turn to their partner or their friend and they go, that was the one. We should have bought that. And they allowed that to happen to themselves by placing in a situation where their human instincts took over as opposed to clear, rational decision making. If you bid early, you're making rational decisions. You bid late, it's generally instinct that's driving your decision making. So this theory about we wait right till the end and wait till it gets caught in the market and then we sweep in, you've done just as many auctions as I have. It rarely works. Like, it probably happens 1 in every maybe 200 that happens. Most of the time, 99% of the time, it's bought by someone who sends their intentions early. A statistic we say a lot is 68% of the times the opening bidder buys the property. It's true, because they're either the most confident or they act like it. And it's all about confidence.
Yeah, I also liken it to a game of poker. It's one of those things, if you're in the room and you're bidding aggressively, it lets your competitors know that you're serious, you want it, and will also have them think that, hey, this person's not going to stop, so I may as well let them have it. And I've seen that happen numerous times. Obviously, if you're competing against someone that's got very deep pockets, and their strategy is just to sit back and just keep going up by $1,000, they can outbid you. And I've seen that happen as well. But for most people that are somewhat conscious of what they're going to spend, if someone's bidding very quickly, very aggressively, and regardless of the increments, whether they're 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, if they're going immediately after someone else, it can throw others off their game.
I was going to ask you a question around that. I know it's your podcast, not mine, but I want to ask you a question anyway. Do you see a big difference with high-end auctions as opposed to, I guess, more general variety or standard auctions, being that in a high-end auction, for example, the one at 24 million, does the underbidder usually stop because they don't love the property enough or they don't see the value, whereas in a more standard garden variety auction, the underbidder traditionally stops because they've run out of money. Is that a fair statement?
I think it got to the point on that one where the last bid that we made, the underbidder was 23.7, and I told the bidder on the phone that he needed to have a larger. They were going up in 20s and $50,000 increments at the end, and I said, mate, let's go to 24. We're going to get there anyway, so let's go and show that we're serious and stamp our feet. And in doing that and going relatively quickly after his 23.7, it just showed that we weren't going to stop. Reality was that was at 23.65, I think it was. He was saying, just let him have it.
Yep.
And then he went 20, the other underbidder went 23.7. He was like, no, just let him have it. And then they went for one last lunge. And I saw them afterwards a couple of days later at the property, and the wife jumped out of the car and was so happy that they'd gone. And he said, look, in hindsight, I paid a little bit more than I wanted to, but it's exactly what we wanted, and it was rare, and we're not going to get it again. And so it's just putting people in a position to make a decision. If they thought they had to pay that, they probably wouldn't have turned up. They probably would have given it a miss, and same with the underbidder. So, I think there's a level of rational decision making that comes in at some point, but I have seen in the larger auctions, if the winning bidder is aggressive, the others will usually drop off. So,
and we say that to buyers. We use a phrase called walking up to the cliff. So if your budget is here, walk right up to the cliff and do it confidently, and then stop. Like, if you try and slow down the bidding and drip and drab, that shows to everyone that you're getting close to your limit. Their limit might have been 24, that buyer. They ran to the edge of the cliff. Now, they could have been right at the edge of the cliff, but no one knew. They just did it aggressively. And that, like I said, confidence is everything. It's giving the perception that you're not going to stop, even if you are.
Yep. Yeah, I've been engaged once to act on behalf of a buyer's agent, which seemed a little bit foreign for me because I haven't represented the buyers as such before, and I had to bid at an auction at Nobby's Outlook, which colleagues were doing the auction. We'd pitched for the business but didn't get it because we weren't an international brand, and so I turned up with one of my clients who I did all the DD for. He gave me permission to bid on it sight unseen. I had a budget of up to 25 million before I needed to seek further instructions. There were 3 billionaires amongst a whole heap of other bidders there, and I just walked up to them, said hello, had a chat, said, oh yeah, look, and they asked what I was doing. Oh, I'm just here to bid on behalf of a client. He's told me to make sure I walk away with the keys, so it's not my money, let's have some fun with it and see where we go. And oh, who is it? I said, oh look, obviously it's confidential, I can't let you know, but very high net worth, and he's just buying it to land bank. And so every time they would bid, I'd go 250,000 within 2 seconds, like just straight bang. And then they dropped off at 23.75 we ended up buying it for. And one of them rang me afterwards and gave me a mouthful. He said, I would have given you my house to sell. I said, mate, I was engaged by someone else. But it's just interesting that the mindset of how aggressive they approached it, and we approached it, got the result. And I use that when I'm talking to bidders all the time. I'm like, if you want to turn up to an auction and you want to own it, you need to stamp your feet and bid, like you said, aggressively, walk right up to the cliff as quickly as you can and without hesitation. And you'll either get it or you won't, but you won't die wondering.
The other thing about bidding really quickly is it forces decisions back on someone else all the time.
Yep.
You know, if you've got a clear strategy and you just execute it straight away, the decision keeps passing back across to the other bidder, and that can become overwhelming. Like, feels like they're constantly making decisions. Are we going to go? Are we going to go? Oh, yeah, okay, go. And they go, and then you go bang, and then it goes back to them again. Like, the best strategy, I think, is having your decision made around as soon as they make their decision, you're ready to go back again. If they bid again, we're going again. And then it just keeps heaping back across them.
Yeah, I've always found that to be a very good strategy that we discuss with buyers. So.
Yeah, be brave.
Yeah. So what do you think the top 3 mistakes are that agents typically make when executing an auction campaign?
It's a really good question. I think the first one is, we mentioned earlier, we spoke about handling price inquiry, fumbling price inquiry, not having a clear and defined strategy how to do that. It's going to come to you in two different ways, really. It's going to come via phone calls and it's going to come via email. Having a clear strategy as to answer those questions is important. Here's the evidence we're going to provide to them. Here's the recent sales. Here's what we're framing around the motivation of the seller, and just being ready and confident to distribute that. The second one is probably the biggest one, is they don't provide enough information to their owners. So, we really condense a time frame on the market, and that's the idea with an auction. Is it's a short, sharp time frame on the market that gets your seller to understand the market quickly and gets them on and off the market as quickly as possible.
So when you say information, you mean market feedback?
Everything, yeah. So market feedback is predominant one. So the obvious one is offers. So we always say the general golden standard of an auction campaign is if you can get 3 written offers to your owner, clearance rate is above 96%. If you get 3 written offers to your owner, you are just about a statistical certainty to sell it. So that's your number one focus. But that's everything. That's recent sales evidence to your owners. It's comparative listings that come on the market evidence to your owners. It's media information that's circling at the moment that buyers might be reading. It's how's their property performing online in terms of internet views and inquiries. All that information presented to their owners. So not doing enough of that is incredibly important, but also the follow-up on the back of that. So it's no good sending a report to an owner if you're not actually talking about the contents of the report, because they may not read it. And if they don't read it, you may as well have not done it. So sending a report through to your owners and then actually addressing them and say, Michael, I sent you that report. How do you feel about it? Oh, we haven't read it yet. Well, you guys really need to read it. We talk about reports as being like the umbilical cord for you to the market. If you don't have an umbilical cord, you're not getting any of the information through. So you've got to have that connection to the market. It's incredibly important. And the last one, which we mentioned earlier, is that not building a strong enough relationship with their buyers. Overestimating buyers' interest. A buyer rang and they told me on a Tuesday before a Friday auction they're going to come to the auction, and then leaving them alone. The chance of them coming in this market is probably 50-50 at best. And that's, again, where we see great agents we work with. They'll tell us on a Wednesday or a Tuesday, hey, I'm going to have 4 bidders for the auction. You'll turn up and they'll have 4. Average agents tend to overestimate. I've got 4 people that have told me they're coming, so I've got 4 bidders. You turn up and they'll have 1 or 2 if they're lucky, and those 1 or 2 won't be prepped well enough. So constant communication with their buyers, particularly in the last week, providing market insight information to your owners, and then providing that or handling that inquiry effectively.
Yep. Is auction ever the wrong sales strategy to use for a property?
Well, I guess I'll declare first that I've got a conflict of interest in answering this question because I'm compensated to call auctions. So I don't think it's ever the wrong one. It's only the wrong one if you have unrealistic expectations around it. So auctions sometimes work and thrive because they have a lot of competition. Sometimes they work because you can't find sales evidence and you don't want to price and make a pricing mistake. Sometimes they work to reduce days on market. Sometimes they work because it makes a property stand out. So I just think it's about having an expectation around it. So we see a lot that agents will pick up a listing from another agent that may have been run as a priced campaign or a no price campaign, but not an auction, or even an auction, and then they'll re-auction it. And they'll set their expectations around that as if it's a fresh property to the market. We're going to have 10 registered bidders, it's going to go off, and it doesn't happen. They end up with 1 or 2. So in that case there, auction was not the wrong sales strategy. What was wrong was your expectations as to what was going to occur. So what you need to have is realistic expectations around why you're doing the auction and the likely delivery of the campaign. But I think one of the underrated assets of most or all good agents is versatility. So I think all good agents we work with all have a great understanding about every method of sale. They understand how private treaty works. They understand how auction works, for sale, EOI, and they choose the right one based upon the circumstance and the vendor at the particular point in time. Average agents we work with, they will steadfastly believe that one method of sale is the only one that works in the area, and they'll bang that one to death. Whether that be auction or private treaty or offers over or for sale or contact agent, whatever, that's the only one they do, and they shoehorn everyone into that particular strategy. So I think having that versatility is important, then you're just pulling the right lever at the right time.
And ultimately, I think it comes down to vendors' motivation. So we've had stock at $30, $40, $50 million listings, and we know on the Gold Coast there's limited depth in buyers to buy homes of that calibre. So trying to put people in competition in a room can be a little bit challenging if you don't have a vendor that actually wants to meet the market and divest the asset. So then we will look at other strategies. But in saying that, when we recently did the one at the Corso, we ended up with 10 registered bidders because of the narrative and achieved a really good price. So I think it's always a good strategy to employ, but you've got to get buy-in from the vendors on those really high-end assets. And
I must say, selfishly, when I see you guys list a really high-end property and it's an EOI or something, I die a little bit inside, because I would love to call that auction, and that'd be a lot of fun. But again, it's choosing the appropriate one rather than you steadfastly believing I know everything and it's all going to be this way. It's saying, hey, we do this well in this situation. Which one would you like to choose, or putting one forward?
Yeah, look, I'll usually base it around depth, and if I've got something where there's a very narrow portion of the market and it's in a price point that there's even narrower, we'll usually look at strategies that are going to give us time, and we'll set vendors' expectations around that. But for the most stuff, if it's blue chip real estate, we've seen some outstanding results and some properties that have sold well above reserve through the last couple of years, and so it's been great to see the team embrace it and the outcomes for vendors. I saw one at Jefferson Lane last year where reserve was 6.5. We had instructions to come and seek further instructions if the bidding stopped at 6, and then it sold for 8.9. And the feeling that the vendors get and the agent and everyone involved when you see that happen is it's pretty memorable.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the underrated thing too is your underbidders walk away and they're never unhappy with you. The underbidder at 8.8 of that one wouldn't have walked out cursing you or Michael. They curse themselves because they had an opportunity and they missed out. Quite often when they get into a multiple offer situation, they blame the agent. Oh, you must have devolved our offer to somebody else, or you must have done this or done that. So that transparency is a great thing. And I think the thing we say a lot to a lot of businesses is if you have a great business, you want as many people with an insight to your business as possible. So don't do your business in private, do it in public and show everyone that you're great. And I think, to your credit and particularly your team's credit, is they've embraced that better than just about anyone. Is they know they've got a great business. They know they work in a great business. The way that you guys set up for your auctions is first class. You highlight that out to the marketplace. And what you're really doing is inviting the community inside your business for half an hour or 45 minutes to watch the way you do a transaction. And that's incredibly powerful as a listing tool as well.
So Justin, obviously when you're doing a lot of auctions now and you find that your bidding sort of stalls, what's the usual process there? I know what we're doing with us, but just for everyone listening in and how we then manage that to try and negotiate through to a sale.
Yeah, so as an auctioneer, we have a few triggers and things that we work from. Here in Queensland, we're kind of used to slow bidding. It's pretty common practice. We do see some southern auctioneers get very uncomfortable when there's lack of bidding because they're used to markets that are really vibrant, dynamic, a lot of bidding, and as soon as that doesn't happen, it becomes much more difficult. Here in Queensland, we're kind of used to doing a lot with a little. So as an auctioneer, what we'll do is we'll look for what our next course of action is. So we have a variety of tools up our sleeve. If the bidding stalls, that might be to place a vendor bid, that may be to reduce the number we're asking for, it may be to call it on the market, it may be to pause and go inside to negotiate, which is the most common one in Queensland at the moment. So the auction generally will start, usually there'll be a bit of engagement, it'll get to a level that's not a level the owners would sell it. You then sort of are hitting the brakes, taking the highest bidder inside, having a reasonably transparent conversation with them around where they need to get to buy it. At the same point, having a transparent conversation with the seller as to where they need to be to sell it, hoping those two numbers overlap at some point in time, and we can come back out and sell it. But there's always something we can do. As an auctioneer, we've got what we call a trial close, which is that first, second, third thing that you hear a lot. What that is in essence is it's a threat to the crowd that if you don't act and do something, I'm going to do something. So that's always the first port of call as an auctioneer, that if it's stalling, we try and stimulate activity by doing that. And then if that doesn't happen, we'll do whatever action is appropriate off the back of that at that particular point in time. But again, this speaks to how well good agents deal with their buyers. Is they've usually prepped their buyers, they've got their buyers engaged, they've got their buyers, ready to go and put their paddles in the air. The ones who are still learning their craft generally have their buyers hang back because they haven't been coached as to why they should be participating at that point in time.
So we see on the odd occasion a property that doesn't sell at auction. What's sort of next? How do you advise that people set it up for the post-auction sale? Obviously, I know that with us, the ones that don't transact at auction, most of them tend to transact within the next 7 to 14 days and some within the next 24 to 48 hours. But for the listeners, what would your advice be around that when you're struggling to get bidders to participate or come to a level that that's going to meet the seller's expectations and also fall in line with comparable sales?
I think the first thing is when we go into listing tables and we talk about auction, we talk about a 3-stage process. Sometimes we have the mentality that if it gets to the 3rd stage, it's been a failure. That's not the case. Sometimes the properties just need to go there. Sometimes your conditional interest is stronger than your unconditional interest, or it needs a bit more time on market, or your best buyer saw it a little bit late and it needs to go to that 3rd stage. One thing we say here always is it's situational dependency. So there's not a hard and fast rule as to what happens the moment the property gets passed in. It's situational dependent. So if you have parties that are ready to negotiate basically after the auction with conditions, then you don't rush to the market and throw a price out there. You give them a chance to come in, make their conditional offers. And like you said, quite commonly, particularly for you guys, is it's then wrapped up inside of 24 or 48 hours after the auction under contract with conditions. If you don't have anyone waiting in the wings, you may look to employ a couple of different strategies. One may be that you leave the price off it for a defined period of time. So you may flick it to for sale and leave the price offer for say 48 hours just to gauge the interest that comes in before you commit to a price. Or sometimes you go straight to the pricing point. So you say, okay, we've established that we don't have any unconditional buyers at the level we want. What we want to do now is send a clear message to the market as to where they need to be to try and secure it. Price goes on it, and then that defines the next part of the strategy.
So obviously there's a lot of new technologies coming out and various platforms to allow digital bidding. Where do you sit on all that, and what do you see coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting age for not only for auctions, it's an exciting age for technology, right? That we're doing things now that we never thought we were sort of capable of before. My fundamental belief has always been around giving choice. So we give choice to people what they'd like to do. I don't believe that we should shoehorn people into a particular way of buying a property because we want that to happen. So I think the best auctions or the best options are hybrid auctions. So that gives people a chance, if they want to be there in person and feel it, experience it, or if they don't want that and they want their privacy maintained, as we mentioned about one of the earlier auctions, they can bid over the phone. Obviously, digital bidding is now available as well. I think that's probably the least preferred strategy as an agent because you don't have that same touch with the buyer. You have the buyer that sits behind a computer screen that's disengaged away from the auction, the agent, and that can be a bit isolating for them, but also for the agent to know actually what their intentions are. But I think ultimately our job is to give choice. And I think the one thing that COVID taught us was flexibility is important. We don't force people to go into offices 9 to 5. There's a work from home component, just the same as we shouldn't force people to turn up at auctions or force them behind a computer screen. We give them the choice, how they prefer to buy, because if they're more comfortable, they're more likely to do what we want them to do anyway.
Yep. What about auction days, Fridays versus Saturdays versus Sundays? I know that there's a big sort of impression out there that we have to do things on a Saturday or a Sunday to get people to turn up, but we've been doing the majority of our auctions on Fridays or sometimes Wednesdays and had enormous attendance. So you have any thoughts around that?
I have a lot of thoughts, around this. And I think the thoughts that we have aren't guesses. We track, our company did just over 6,500 auctions last year. So we've got a very large data set we pull from to kind of make these decisions and have these opinions. Auction day used to be Saturday, but we also used to drive around in horse and carts. Life changes and evolves. Our best day now statistically by every measure is Friday, and that's by clearance rate, average bidders and average attendance. And my theory, which again is grounded I think in some evidence, my theory is that the problem that you have with Saturday and Sunday is you compete with everything. So you compete with other auctions and other open homes first and foremost. The other thing is you start competing against weddings, christenings, birthdays, people going away. The weather's good here on the coast, they go to the beach, your nippers, junior sport, everything competes at that time. Family time also competes. Whereas on Friday, most people have got a flexibility to their work environment now. So very few people are working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, unless they're a professional service in a particular role. So they have more scope to actually go and attend these things. And I would argue that at 1 o'clock on a Friday, you're looking for something to do as opposed to 1 o'clock on a Saturday when you've got to choose what you do. The other thing that we've noticed a lot is our best attendances are usually early in the morning or late in the afternoon. My theory, and again, another theory, but my theory is being a toddler parent is in the middle of the day, if you've got young children, you're ruled out because they need to sleep. So people are more accessible to being there early in the morning or late in the afternoon. This notion that auctions only work if they're held at 11 o'clock on a Saturday is garbage frankly. And we talk a lot with people. They'll ring us and say, oh, the auction has to be 11 o'clock on a Saturday, or we might employ someone else. We say it's crazy that you're making your decision around the positioning of the sun as opposed to the person who's actually been handling the negotiation and the auction. Like, one of those two things is going to impact the sale price, and it's not the sun. Because what happens if not day if the sun doesn't decide to come up? What if it's behind a cloud? And you based your whole strategy around having our auction at 11 o'clock because the sun position's perfect and the sun doesn't perform. And you're left with not only an inferior weather conditions, you're also left with an inferior auctioneer because you prioritise the time and the date over the person that's conducting it. So, yeah, the biggest thing that changed has been that auctions happen every day of the week, anytime. You know, it's just about working in what's trying to get the best outcome.
With all the auctions that you've called through your career, what is the most memorable auction that you've done?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Our company, as you mentioned, Rob from our company did the one at the Corso a few weeks ago that sold for 24 million. That might have been it, but Rob stepped up to the plate. I did ring Rob during the day and just make sure he didn't have laryngitis or something, which he did, so he was fine to do it. I think the one you mentioned last year we did on Jefferson Lane was stuck in my memory. We did one earlier this year as well on the hill at Tugun. I can't remember what it transacted for, but it was well above.
In the nines.
Yeah, well above sellers' expectations, really strong bidding, like great atmosphere, iconic position. That was a really memorable one as well. But honestly, you know, as much as the high price ones are memorable, the most memorable ones or the most fulfilling ones that I have are the ones where we feel like we've impacted the outcome. Those high-end ones that have a lot of interest that sale past reserve, you're really just a bid handler. Now, there's a skill to that, but it's still just bid handling. The ones that I really particularly enjoy, the ones where the negotiation is quite long and taxing, and you have an impact to the outcome and the overall result, they're actually the most memorable ones because you walk away from them feeling like I've actually contributed to this being what it was. The ones that fly off the handle are a lot of fun to call, but they're probably not as fulfilling because you realise, well, I had very little impact over the result today.
Perfect. Mate, thanks for your time today. Appreciate all your pearls of wisdom for everyone out there, and appreciate all the work we've been doing together.
Likewise, appreciate you, and thanks for having me on.